Okay, so this is Horn Players by John Michael Basquiat in 1983. It's painted with acrylic and oil paint stick on canvases. And just to give a little bit of background on the artist, John Michael Basquiat, someone that probably everyone has heard of, he's a very famous contemporary artist, was a neo-expressionist contemporary artist who was born in 1960 and died in 1988 at 28 years old. He was born and lived and worked in New York City, and he used his background as a graffiti artist to incorporate poetry and visuals into his famous paintings and focusing on topics of colonialism, racism, and class disparities, as well as the cultures that inspired him, like jazz. The form of the painting is a painting with acrylic on 3 canvas panels. The canvases are black and navy, and on the first panel, you see a man holding a vaguely shaped horn instrument with red musical notes coming out of it. And he's wearing a suit. And on the bottom of the same panel, you can see a soapbox, a labeled drawing of a foot indicating form, and some scattered words throughout the composition. Across all 3 panels, I wanted to mention there's lots of bold white brushstrokes. The second canvas portrays a portrait of a balding, misshapen head with white facial features that contrast the otherwise hot pink structure of the head and the black background. Another vague form of an instrument, and some other seemingly random words. They notably are repeated across the canvas or crossed out. And on the third canvas, very similar to the first, there's another musician in a suit who has a horn instrument, and there's more words, alchemy, teeth, those appear. Okay, the content. The 2 horn players are famed musicians. Dizzy Gillespie, I don't really know how to pronounce that, but him and Charlie Parker, who were a saxophone and a trumpet player, respectively. Some of the words, most of the words, are in reference to those musicians who actually appeared in multiple works of his. He was very inspired by jazz musicians of the time because he lived in New York City, where jazz was very influential. So the words do, shu, di, obi were referenced to scat, and they appeared on the canvases. And that was one of Gillespie's, hopefully I'm saying that right, signature performance aspects when he did his jazz performances, is he would scat a lot. And it was just a hallmark of jazz music and culture in New York at the time in general. And then so other words are references to Charlie Parker. Ornithology is like the study of birds, and his nickname was Bird, and it's an example of one of his compositions from 1946, one of his jazz compositions. And then Pri and Chan, which also appear on the canvas, are the nicknames of his wife and daughter that Basquiat was referencing. And he also attempted to portray the two identifiable subjects through language and visual elements, which is like a hallmark of his work, is that he liked to include poetry and other like linguistic elements into his art to give the viewer multiple ways of interpreting the same piece. Okay, the context. Um, the word scrawled across the 3 canvases is not an isolated incident. He was using words all the time in his paintings. And this is because when he was younger, he was a graffiti artist who went by the name Samo, which is an acronym for same old shit, but inappropriate words. But Basquiat had taken to the streets of Manhattan when he was a kid and wrote a bunch of cryptic messages all over buildings, bridges, anywhere he could. And he then later like started maturing the pseudonym to critique the avant-garde and art world because he didn't really agree with a lot of the messaging that they were putting out. And then, ironically, a twist of fate, he became the talk of the contemporary art world very fast, with some of his paintings, as we'll get into, breaking records for how much paintings could sell at in auctions. So yeah, in the 1980s, he became the talk of the contemporary art world, and Horn Players has overt references to actually past abstract and cubist artists such as Picasso. You can probably see that there's some similarities between the piece The Three Musicians, which we've also covered in our history. And funnily enough, kind of actually probably very offensive and derogatory, Basquiat was known as the Black Picasso, which he did not embrace for good reason. But the horn players are positioned in a similar way. The triptych format is utilized by both, and The way Basquiat painted it actually gave the appearance of a collage, most people thought, and that's very much like Picasso's work. And then Basquiat also just constantly added to his list of inspirations, not only just the modern artists that inspired him, but also just the musicians that he continued to reference in many paintings. Okay, so another work by Basquiat that you might also know is Untitled from 1982, and this is probably uncontestedly one of Basquiat's most famous paintings because it broke the record for the most money that a American work had ever sold for at auction at $110.5 million, which is crazy. And it's especially notable for, an American artist to get this far. And yeah, so in 2017 in May, it sold for $110.5 million at Sotheby's auction house. And it definitely cemented his legacy. And as you can see, the painting is, a work of many brilliant primary colors with a giant skull contrasting on the canvas. And then also, as I said before, Basquiat obviously took inspiration from the three musicians, Picasso, and the stances of the musicians, the triptych format, and the abstraction are undeniably similar. And they cover similar themes. And though many people think that the painting, the the painting that Basquiat did, I'm fumbling over my words, excuse me, but while people think that Basquiat's painting had some political undertones, it mostly just referenced his love of jazz and of Black culture. And that's similar to what Picasso's referenced, just the love of music and culture. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you.